Hello, everybody. Today, I have a very special guest. She's one of the most influential people in my life right now, I think. And I am a certified teacher of her program that she co-founded with Will Kilroy and the great Mala Powers. It called the NMCA, the National Michael Chekhov Association. She works, I don't know, she will tell us many, many years in this field of producing teachers, actors, and introducing artists to the Michael Chekhov technique. I'm very pleased today to talk with Lisa Dalton.
Hello, Ophir, and thank you for inviting me to come and chat with you today. Very excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'm Lisa Dalton. I am with the National Michael Chekhov Association, and I live in Fort Worth, Texas, the United States.
So, how are you? Let's start with this simple question in this time.
In this time, it's an interesting time for me because I would actually right now have been in Kathmandu directing a children's play for an international theater festival, and I would have been teaching a professional class of actors in Kathmandu. And due to this virus event, pandemic, I'm home. And in place of being home, what I'm doing is spending a tremendous amount of time sharing information and gathering information from colleagues and with colleagues. Interviews and workshops and classes that range from teaching as a guest teacher for universities and or as a guest for other Chekhov colleagues, or listening to how people are handling teaching online and mentoring many teachers in how to do it and what to do and how to explore it, what to try. So my activity in terms of what I might call social outreach and social output has increased tremendously. And I've had to start sort of cutting back and defining how much I can give in this time. And it's been exciting working on developing new ways to communicate through this online medium and asking myself, what can the Chekhov technique bring to this communication process? And so how I am right now is intrigued and excited, and also challenged in terms of staying out of the refrigerator and getting my physical world back into position, getting physically active, and getting my physical body in its aging phases and its notorious sustaining of conditions from my very physical life, which included being a stunt woman and an athlete in many different kinds of ways. So I'm getting better and better every day, I like to think, and excited about what's happening.
Okay, so let's start with formally the first question. And first question is, what's your first memory of the art world that made an impact? Like a theater performance, a movie, a painting, I don't know.
I would say my first memory of an art and the way it impacted me would have been in church. I was raised Catholic, and perhaps not church per se, but a Catholic school in first grade when I was 5 and 6 years old. And the school had a lot of festivals and pageants. So for every holy day, there was a performance. And I imagine that one of the mothers of one of my classmates must have been an actress who'd moved from New York down to Florida or something, professional dancer, dance teacher, something like that. And she was now in Miami Beach where I was. And she created these performances. And I remember I was 5 or just turning 6 years old and seeing these plays about the Feast of the Annunciation. And then each festival for that year, at the end of the year, there was what we called the spring performance, and everyone in the school got to be in a musical number. And so that was my first official performance on stage, and we did a can-can dance, and I was absolutely hooked. I knew that when I saw the performance, I knew I wanted to do that. And then when I got to do it, it was all I wanted to do. I had joined the choirs so that I could, perform the music, and I, just tried to perform whenever I could.
Oh, I didn't know that you saw the first thing of art in the church. It's interesting. And well, my second question is, when and where did you learn the arts?
I had very artistic and culturally oriented parents, and I was one of 5 children. I was the 4th of 5 of us. And so in this school in Florida, we had this, lady, and she brought those arts very strongly into us. And when we moved from there, when I was in 4th grade up to Maryland near Washington, D.C., there was no such thing. But my parents were still very interested. They were always interested in music. They were interested in opera and in classical music and barbershop. And in Florida, I took ballet lessons and took piano lessons, and I remember in kindergarten trying to draw better. I was a terrible artist, always wanted to draw better, and but we had artwork on our walls because my father's parents were in Chicago near the Chicago Art Institute, and they had quite a collection of real art from well-known artists. So my home had oil paintings and so the arts in all areas of painting and music and dance. My father was a dancer and a ballroom dancer, and so at 5 or 6 years old, my 2 brothers and my sister and I performed at the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami Beach, doing the cha-cha together. So my exposure to the arts in general came through my parents, I would say, and through what they were able to do. Economics dissolved, and there was no more opportunity to be educated from the time we left Florida and until I went into college, and there I got to study, art history and painting and singing and theater, of course, my major.
So your formal was in what university again?
University of Maryland was my alma mater, and went there for 4 years as was a liberal arts plan, and I was in the theater department, although I was barely visible in the theater department.
What do you mean?
My high school time was the most developmental theatrically for me as an actor, because I went to a brand new high school. So there were just two classes, a sophomore and a sophomore and a junior class, and there was no theater. And the English teacher was created a drama club, and I was part of the drama club. And in the drama club, we created and defined the role of theater for the school. And I directed my first longer plays. I had directed earlier plays starting in 5th grade. And there I directed the winning class play all 3 years, sophomore, junior, and senior years. And I starred in several of the plays there, and I was one of the founders of the Thespian Honor Society there, and was really nurtured by the teacher there, whose work was centered in Viola Spolin's improvisational theater games. And so I was kind of, in a strong role of leadership. It was kind of like we co-created that, the teacher and myself, and with a few other people. And that led me to have a certain sort of status as an artist. When I went into the university, I was completely lost in the system. I wasn't given the proper classes that a drama major was supposed to get. So I was behind in terms of the department. I was off sync, and I had to work to pay for my room and board. I had a scholarship to college, but my room and board was not covered. So I had to work 6 days a week in a fabric shop. I was a costumer, seamstress. And so I missed out on a lot of stuff that happens in the evenings of the theater department. And it wasn't until I learned how to wait tables in my junior year that I actually was available to do the evening activities, which included director scenes and things like that, which is way too late in a massive theater department. So I was quite lost, and I had one major teacher who recognized that, and her name was Mead Hindman Andrews, or Mead Andrews Hindman. Anyway, Mead recognized and wrote in my journal that she thought I was in the wrong school for me, and she referred me to a program at American University when I graduated for summer programs, where I studied there with Richard Schechner and the Performing Garage and the Worcester Group, and with the Shalico Company and Mabu Mines, and out of the Public Theater, and with Charles Ludlam and the Ridiculous Theatrical Company, and Mimes, and got very heavily into Grotowski and Commedia dell'arte and mask work and clowning. And I went totally into the physical theater. And that happened in college in part because while I couldn't gain any recognition or opportunity in the theater department, I just went out and created my own avant-garde theater in the streets. And that just kind of continued. Mead recognized that and directed me there. And from there, I wound up moving to New York and got into an avant-garde, Grotowski-based, clown-based contemporary comedian company called Bond Street Theater, which is proudly still around today, 44 years later, doing amazing work in the world. So that was really my education.
Hey, so you consider Bond Street as your education, or no? Bond Street is I mean, you learn stuff in Bond Street.
Yes, I mean, Bond Street was an intense education in that well, a couple of things. One was we were a teaching artist company. And so we were on the faculty of NYU. So at 22 years old, I was teaching at NYU. And I was teaching this acrobatics, gymnastics, stage combat, juggling, the clowning skills. And when I was in college, also, I taught back at my high school for my high school teacher. I taught for a year in high school while I was in college. And so I was again an experienced teacher, but I was learning much more deeply mime and commedia dell'arte and mask work and the combat. It was really we did 250 performances a year. So, and I did that for 4 years. So it was quite an education.
Okay, and what was your first professional part?
My first professional part on camera. So, I mean, Bond Street was a professional company out of La Mama Theater at the time, but my first professional on camera part was soap opera called As the World Turns. And it was in 1978, and I was working in a restaurant, almost like a Playboy bunny, not quite as fancy, but very much like that. And I don't know if anyone has seen the show Glow with the 1980s wrestlers, lady wrestlers. I think it's on Netflix, but that's kind of what we had shiny tights and glistening leotards, and that's how we waited tables. And it was on the ground floor near Grand Central Station in New York, and up on the upper floors was the studio where they made this soap opera, As the World, on the Edge of Night. And the producers came down every afternoon and had cocktails when they were done. And so our restaurant manager made sure that all the producers knew that the servers were actors. And they knew that I was a physical theater actor. So they had a part where one of their main characters was going through the police academy, and they needed physical actors who could do the dive rolls and the combat and stuff like that. And so they hired me. I did 5 episodes as a police recruit, and the actress was Margaret Collin, and that got me my union cards and launched my on-camera career, which was how I made my living for the next 40 years.
When was the first time that you came across the Michael Chekhov technique, and maybe what did you think about it at first?
So I got married in 1980, and Bond Street was starting to go overseas and in very war-torn and politically strifed areas. And doing that was not meeting my needs. And I also had become a successful clown and comedian for private entertainment, for birthday parties and for gala affairs, corporate events and things like that. So I found I could actually make quite a bit of money with that. And I also was given the opportunity to be in a film doing a lot of physical activity, which led to me becoming a stunt woman. So I couldn't stay with Bond Street, and I left them in July of 1980 and began work on the film. The film ended in September, and I was, for the first time in 4 years, with nothing to do. I saw an ad in Backstage which said they were looking for a mime actor who could do all these things, which of course I'd been doing in Bond Street. And it was for a play called The Fox. And I auditioned for it and I got cast, and there were just 3 of us in the play. This is the script. I actually have the script. And the script has on it has for each chapter, of it, it has a description of the scene, what the scene is about. And then the following pages has the movement notations and the descriptions very, very specifically. And the director who played one of the 3 characters and his friend who played the other female character, the 3 of us worked for 4 months on this script. And the script has no words, no dialogue. And he took me entirely through the Chekhov work, the powerful atmospheres, imaginary bodies, centers, gestures, radiating, receiving, very, very powerfully. And I knew that despite the fact that I had done 1,000 performances in the previous 4 years, I had done nothing like this. And in Bond Street, I had the last 2 years especially, I was playing this sort of female Darth Vader villainess, very powerful, wicked archetype. And in this play, I was a frail and neurotic, spinsterly woman, fragile woman. And that fragility and all that, I just was completely opposite to what I had been playing. Yet I knew that what this director, Wilfred A. Hunt, stepped me through was the best thing I'd ever done. It was the thing that merged everything I'd ever learned. While I was in New York, even though I was with Bond Street doing this extreme physical theater, I was still in method acting classes. I was at HB Studios learning Uta Hagen. I was learning Meisner. I was still learning because I wasn't satisfied with the external physical world. And I wasn't satisfied with the memory recall. And whatever it was that Wilfred did to me, I knew was life transforming. And it took me a while to find out. But when I was speaking to a clown partner of mine, just saying, I don't know what he did to me, but I need to find it. She finally sort of pulled out this book called To the Actor, and I read the beginning of it and I went, oh my God, that's it.
So he didn't tell you that it's Chekhov?
Nope.
Oh, so it required investigating.
It required investigating. And I kept complaining. We did this. And my partner kept saying, and her name is Trisha Gray, she kept saying, Lisa, have you read Chekhov? Have you read Chekhov? And I kept saying, yes, yes, yes. And finally, like the 4th or 5th time, I got really snotty, egotistical, and I turned to her and I said, Trish, I graduated from a major university. Of course I've read Cherry Orchard and the Three Sisters and Uncle Bob. And she went, no, Lisa, no. We're talking Michael Chekhov, the nephew of Anton. And I didn't even know there was a Michael. And she brought me her copy. And right there I said, well, who's doing this? And she said, well, I don't know that there are really any teachers, but I have another clown partner who maybe if we ask him, he'll lead us in exploring it. And his name is Ted Pugh. So I said, let's call him now. And that was how Ted started teaching. So we thank God for Trisha Gray connecting us. And, Ted and I started working together, and we worked together for many years.
And who is the most influential teacher or teachers that taught you the technique?
Because I've had many, perhaps more, I mean, I know I've worked with more direct students of Michael Chekhov than anyone in the world. I got many, many different points of view, and each person who brought me their creative individuality's version of Michael Chekhov gifted me something very deeply, and I appreciate them all. I, as I said, worked with Ted from the early 80s till the beginning of 1988. And so Ted and I worked, I worked with Ted as he was developing his teaching style. Fern Sloan joined us, and a number of other people came into that organization. And when he went on to teach at Beatrice Straight Studio, I studied with all the teachers there as well. So without Ted, definitely wouldn't be where I am. And I'm so incredibly grateful for Ted. And so one of the things that was so influential for Ted was because he was not a teacher. He hadn't been a teacher. So, and I was a teacher. I came into it as a teacher. I was making my living as an actor and a stunt woman and comedian, applying everything that I was learning. And that was creating a lot of, commercial success. I was making a really good living off of Chekhov, doing all these other things, applying it. And while with Ted, we were exercising and exploring it. So there was no pedagogy per se, but I was already also teaching for various schools. So I was already bringing how I was applying it in the world and what I was discovering in our work with Ted to the world, and creating pedagogical structures. With Ted, we might mold for 2 hours. And I knew after doing Grotowski for 2 hours of acrobatic gymnastic and real blood, sweat, and tears, 2 hours of molding was nothing. But the average actor wasn't going to do that. So I started adapting and creating a way to make this learnable faster, more cohesive, more practical applications. And one thing I learned from many of my Dartington Hall teachers, like Bert Hatfield, Beatrice Straight, Ford Rainey, Ford wasn't Dartington, he was Ridgefield, but Deirdre Hurst Dupre and Felicity Mason and Eleanor Faison, they also they weren't natural teachers. So they knew the technique, but they didn't really give you they gave you a great experience with it, but they didn't give you the theory. They didn't give you the underlying principles. They gave you the exercises. And even with Ted, we didn't even do a monologue for 2 years. So we were not integrated with voice. And so there were a lot of challenges that I was working to overcome as I was bringing it out. And so while I learned many, many exercises, I perceived the principles. And George Stanoff, when I went to Los Angeles, had a very clear, that is, by the way, the person to whom this is dedicated, had a very clear pedagogy.
And George Stanoff was the person who worked with Chekhov where?
George joined at Dartington in the second year of Dartington as a dramaturg. He was a Russian who had been in Berlin and had met Chekhov in Berlin. And then he and his wife, Elsa Schreiber, moved to London, and they were in London. Elsa was an acting coach and actress as well. So George was able to come out to Dartington Hall, and there George's task was to draft the improvisations into scripts and help translate some of the Russian materials into English. And also, when Mr. Chekhov was emotionally distraught or whatever, then George would come in and sort of manage and direct. So he became technically the co-director of the Chekhov Theater Studio, and that continued over to Ridgefield, Connecticut in 1938.
And
so,
you're saying that he gave you really the pedagogy that you're working with?
Yes, he gave me, he was the first teacher that gave me, had a specific sequence of teaching the tools and had a specific, basically I would say explore, improvise, and rehearse pattern that is central to the National Michael Chekhov Association pedagogy. It's what was missing from all my other trainings, is lack of application. And George, being in Hollywood, was absolutely very practical about the work. If it didn't apply to a scene, so we would explore atmosphere, for example, and then we would do improvisations with atmosphere, and then we would do the scene study. And as I learned, this was the model of the Actors Lab in Hollywood, where Michael Chekhov taught, but it was on different nights. They'd have exercises on one night, improvisations, and then the scene studies. So this, this pattern of teaching, learning, exploring, playing, and deepening, and then practically applying became a rhythm that I felt was extremely effective. And then, but while I was with George, I was most centrally working with Mala Powers when I moved to Los Angeles. And Mala and I taught together for 18 years. So as the executor of the estate of Chekhov, and as the only actual film star who was privately coached by Chekhov, who went on to teach, she would be the greatest mentor of my life. As a life mentor, Mala Powers would undeniably be that. She was a phenomenal inspiration. She was not a teacher when I met her. She had only led 6 classes the fall before I started working with her. And I started teaching with her in February of 1988. And she knew I was a teacher and that I had been teaching the Chekhov technique, and we had met when she would come to New York and be a student in Ted's classes. So Ted connected me with her and connected me with George when I moved to California. Thank you, Ted. So Mal and I taught until she died in 2007 together. And Mala had parts of the technique nobody else did. She didn't know how to teach the psychophysical exercises. But she knew what Chekhov did with her and how he worked with her and how he guided her and the questions he asked her. And nobody else had given me this. And she was also a devout anthroposophist. So Mr. Chekhov had stopped telling anybody what the sources were, the deeper sources were of many of his concepts. And she called him on it. She said, "You're not telling me the truth, and I need to know." And so he told her. So he, in addition to her being able to share how he coached her, she also was able to share insights into how Chekhov communicated via Steiner with her. And that's something, again, that very, very few, if anybody else, nobody else that I worked with ever had. But there's one more major player of influence in me, for me, and that was Jack Colvin. And Jack Colvin was a young genius, 16-year-old idiot savant, he called himself, when he began to work with Michael Chekhov. And he was a similar age, maybe a year or two, very similar age to Mala Powers and to Joanna Merlin, who I'd studied with in New York. in the early 80s or mid 80s. And Jack was a brilliant genius. By the age of 12, there were psychologists from UCLA taking him around to soirees and presenting him as an idiot savant. He could quote Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, Plato, Sophocles, Aristotle, but he could literally not add 2 + 2.
Wow.
And for the 8 years that we worked together, I never saw him handle a single coin. And he never handled money. He worked with a credit card. He had an accountant who did all his numbers, paid all his bills, everything, because he could not. And so he had a very different kind of thinking force, very, very sharp, critical, incisive, and I would say psychological. And he and Michael Chekhov had many, many discussions on the philosophical side of the world. And he was not at all spiritually oriented. And but they talked about Spinoza, and they talked about all those philosophical people and how they played into what Michael Chekhov was doing. And he mentored me very closely. We spent about 20 to 24 hours a week together, him coming to my classes, and we would discuss then every single student throughout the week. We would discuss the student, their progress, what they needed, how I was speaking, how I was teaching, what I was teaching. And he's the one who introduced and told me about the what became the Three Sister Sensations,
which is a tool of the Michael Chekhov technique.
Yes, so Mr. Chekhov was developing it when he died, and Jack was the only one who knew about it. Jack was, as he said, like Mr. Chekhov's houseboy. He couldn't afford classes, so he worked around the house and was at Michael Chekhov's house a lot. And when Mr. Chekhov was recovering from heart attacks and stuff, Jack would have to take him for walks and things like that. So they had lengthy discussions, and obviously high-level psychological and philosophical discussions, which he shared. And they were working on this concept of equilibrium and the laws of gravity and things like that. So Jack taught me what they were working on. And then in 1994, when I was the representative of the Americas in the International Michael Chekhov Association, I was granted the opportunity to invite a bunch of Chekhov teachers or Chekhov people, Chekhov students, to come to England to be part of the 3rd International Chekhov Workshop. So Jack was one of those, along with Joanna Merlin and then Daphne Field, who'd been only 12 years old at Dartington, and she came, and Mary Lou Taylor, Ford Rainey, and a lot of great people that we managed, Deirdre Hurst Dupre and Eleanor Faison, brought them all to England. So there, Jack and I introduced what became then named the Three Sister Sensations to the world, and it's now become part of the Chekhov canon.
That means, how old are you?
How old are you looking for, sir? Sir, you see, it's just that I can play any age. I can be 16 or 30. In school, I played a 78-year-old woman with rheumatism, and everyone said it was very believable. A 79-year-old rheumatic woman told me so herself.
That's very impressive. But we are not looking for a 79-year-old rheumatic woman. We are looking for a 22-year-old actress. Now, how old are you, please?
22, sir.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I would have said rather 27, 28.
Oh, that's because I have a bad head cold, sir, and it makes me look older. Last year when I had influenza, the doctor thought I was 39, but I promise I can look 22 when you need it, sir.
So, um, in a very short sentence, an influential sentence that you heard from one of your teachers.
Allow yourself to recognize the ideal artistic center within you. And that's as distinct from put the ideal artistic center in your chest. This statement was allow yourself to know that it's there.
Who was...
And Fern Sloan said it, and she wasn't yet teaching regularly, but it was in a workshop with Ted, and Ted was not available that day, and Fern led the exercise. And she said allow, and it shifted my entire consciousness. Because I think I was probably a very thinking dominated person at the time. And every time I did the ideal artistic center and the actors march and all of that, I was getting headaches. And I think invisibly I was going, ah! When I heard the word put your center, it was like I had to push it down against resistance. And this allow, it's like, oh, it's there. It's actually there. It is there. I don't have to do anything to put it there. And then, and then later, when I worked with Mala, her exercise of just saying who me or I am, instinctively pointing to yourself and realizing, oh, yourself is here. Yourself isn't here. And that's why that I do that exercise very early in my teaching now to help people not live for 5 or 6 years with a headache. But to recognize you don't have to do anything to have your ideal artistic center in your chest. It's there.
And you say allow.
And I say allow.
And why, in your opinion, it is important to teach and spread the Chekhov technique?
I feel that humanity is in need of as much infusion, inspiration, and uplift as it can possibly get. And I feel that the entertainer is in a special place, and it's a place that goes back to eons of time, 30, 40,000 years of evidence of archaeological proof of training for actors tells us that this role is important and that it has a deep, deep role in human society. And if the role of entertainers is that deep, then the entertainer must be trained on a higher level, a deeper level, a wider level, a more powerful level than ever before. And the majority of actor trainings out there are destroy the artistic spirit instead of cultivating it. And therefore the art that's put out there, the entertainment that's put out there diminishes the human being instead of expanding it, enhancing it, and strengthening it. Michael Chekhov's work, when done with a full, clear pedagogy, with full, clear consciousness of the intent to bring that force of that I am spirit, permeate the physical world with that art as spirit manifest. It brings healing and enlightenment, uplift, and education, and we need that.
We sure do. And what are the advantages of the Chekhov technique, in your opinion, compared to the other methods?
The biggest advantage is that it's a fully human technique, and it's human in body, mind, and spirit and soul. I think Stanislavski's work has been relegated to the intellect as it's been disseminated, even though Stanislavski's work specifically says you're looking to create the soul and spirit of the character. Why that is, there are books written on between the era, the censorship, etc. But that became the foundation, and then we went, into things that deal with the lower self and your everyday ego, and trying to create personality-based, making yourself into making the character you, instead of transforming yourself into the character. Michael Chekhov's work trains you in a psychophysical body, mind, spirit way to express all potentialities, and it leads you to have a higher aesthetic. So you can move that into any style. You always retain a consciousness of the higher element of the art, no matter how crass. I mean, like I said, I made my living on camera, and a lot of it was in commercials when I stopped jumping off cliffs and crashing through plate glass windows. And so by I could lift an experience in a commercial to a higher level without anyone ever knowing it. It offers you full body, mind, spirit training. It's the only technique I know that's founded in love. So it's fun. It's really fun. And that is not to be overlooked.
Yeah. And why does an actor need a technique in the first place?
Talent is a dime a dozen. As a coach in Hollywood for 18 years, 12 years of professional actor and teacher in New York, I can say there's so many talented people. But without a technique, that talent has no context. It would be a little bit like taking someone who can throw a football really far and say, that's talent. But if you don't teach them patterns, and if you don't tell them how to figure out where a runner might go, the possibility of connecting with a receiver is pretty low. You cannot expect a talent to have any level of consistency unless it has a form and a series of guidelines. So the talented person doesn't need any technique when they're in the zone. But when they're not, they need to rely on talent. Training can strengthen the expression of talent.
Clear. What are your favorite two from the technique, and why?
Oh, that's really challenging. But maybe it's just expanding and contracting.
Why?
It's the foundation of all. It's the foundation of all movement, cosmically, down to the seed. In every breath is an expansion, contraction, and every movement is an expanding or contracting or contracting. Every tool has to, in order to be able to do it, will lead you into some degree of expanding and contracting. It's the mother-father archetypal polarity of all gesture. And it is a pulse of life. So what we do as humans, and it's the pulse of spiritual life as well, and what we do as humans, full human beings, is bring life. And every time you do it, every time you do any of the techniques, they're new if you open to that, and if you explore. You are only expanding and contracting. You're not doing yesterday's expansion. And there's not a finite corner where it hits the wall and stops. it only stops when you cease the consciousness of it. So it goes and it returns and moves. Yeah. So
Thank you for that. And what is your dream regarding to the technique and its future?
I would like to see Michael Chekhov's acting technique part, a fundamental part of all actor training. And I would like it to contain the spiritual aspects that are omitted. I believe that one can teach those without intimidating or violating other people's spiritual or religious practices. I believe you could teach it with those elements, never naming it in the same way that I learned it without it ever being named. I believe it can be brought into youth, as part of the education of our youth from elementary school, kindergarten, and I want, and one of the contributions I hope to make to that possibility is on the synth analysis, the work I'm doing on synth analysis, which is uniting psychophysical, Michael Chekhov's image-driven world with the Stanislavski system of analysis as we know it, and multidimensionalizing the preparatory process. So that bridges that gap between a bunch of exercises. A lot of people learn Chekhov as a bunch of exercises. And so I'm hoping that a cohesive pedagogy that brings application will be what is spread, not just a bunch of exercises. And that's one branch. The other branch is the application for human health and development. There's a great deal of room in the field of human health and development coaching and healing techniques using many of the tools. I call that power gestures. So that's one expression of that.
You promised a book on the synth analysis. Will you keep your word?
I do have 125 pages of it written. And what's not included in that 125 pages so far are examples. So that's where I need to add. I need to add to that text the examples so that you can actually see it in process. So I am collecting that information. And I'm trying to get some good videos of the synth analysis run-throughs and the harmonious groupings so that people can actually see it in a multidimensional way, because that part, it's like singing. It's just really hard to teach through a book. You know, it's creating these harmonious movements and flows, seeing the potential of it is just very difficult. And so I want that. And then I will have to see how much that is, because that same book could also include what I would call guest contributions. So directors who have used it and sharing what they've experienced and how they developed it and amalgamated it and altered it to improve it. It's a living entity, and the people who took my class 5 years ago are learning that it's not the same anymore. So that's another thing that the very most recent developments from last July were incorporated in my January teaching with the NMCA training, so that the certification candidates now have to keep updating what it is that they're delivering, learning, practicing. So if anything should happen to me, Ophir, it's in my computer and Charlie has a copy of it. So it's ready it's in the formation.
Yep. Okay. You have 1 minute to convince someone that completed a drama school to start learning the Chekhov technique. What will you say?
Have you ever had that situation where you got this really great idea and you went to do it and it didn't come out that way at all? I call that the big disc click, right? That sometimes things click, sometimes they don't. What you're experiencing is a gap between your imagination and where your talent lives and your physical body's ability to express what your talent wants to share. If you ever had that problem, it's because there's a gap. Not that you don't have talent, it's a gap between your training, your skill set, and your technique, and your potential. Michael Chekhov will solve that for you. And if you are ever wondering why you are an artist, and sometimes you hate the fact that you love it, Michael Chekhov's technique will help you reawaken the deep love that you bear.
I knew you were the one that do a real pitch in this question. You will deliver. What beauty, it's a very interesting question to ask you. What beauty do you see in being a teacher?
Oh, the opening of the participants. Oh, it's so beautiful. The smiles and this joy and the discoveries, the, little gestures that they go like, boing, like, wow, light bulb, never thought of that. I remember myself sitting at some of my teachers' feet on the floor, looking up with my jaw down and going, oh my God. And when I recognize myself in that moment and I'm saying that there's been an opening, there's been a change, and this person is a happier human being for it. And I'm so grateful to be just a conduit. All I am is I'm just a conduit. I just pass the information through, and if I can keep my lower self out of it and just allow the work to express itself, I see the shift and the increase in happiness.
And as a student, as your student, I can say that it shows. I mean, you can see it on you.
Regarding the question of whether or not I've had any difficulties or challenges with the technique and how did I work to improve them, I would say I've had a great deal of challenge as a teacher of the technique and as a leader in the global community. One of the challenges that came on as I was representative of the Americas for the International Michael Chekhov Association organizing committee. And we did not often have translators for some of our events. And I was told by a dear colleague of mine that there was a certain kind of distrust between what I was saying, which they felt had a great deal of quality content to it, with how I sound when I speak, because I had a very light, soft, childlike voice. And this was in the early 90s. And they said the problem is that when there's not a good, strong translation, what the translation that's coming through, which may sound wise and intelligent, doesn't match this sort of childlike voice. So it sounds like two different people. It sounds deceptive. It doesn't connect. And so one thing I did to improve that was I worked on helping to build a more authentic, mature voice for speaking. So that was one of my challenges. And the other, and I'm so grateful to my colleague who let me know that there was this sort of mix in the messages that I was sending because of the tonal dissonance. Because in fact, I was not speaking through an authentic womanly voice. And the other was that I have, in my work as a leader in this community, been passionate about creating teachable structures and pedagogies, and I have been boldly and blatantly open with my belief that Michael Chekhov's work is a spiritual process. When I listen to On Theater and the Art of Acting, and I read his lectures and to the director and the playwright, I read those words and I listen and hear the words where he speaks of the power of love, and he speaks of the power of the spirit and the distinction between the spirit and the soul. And as I do my deeper research into Rudolf Steiner's influences on Michael Chekhov, I realize that the part of the work that resonates so powerfully with me is the spiritual part. The fact that it is a spiritual act. It is a healing process. And Mr. Chekhov himself had stopped revealing that publicly because he was so persecuted for it. It was why he was forced to leave Russia. He refused to stop integrating his Rudolf Steiner-based materials in it. And the Rudolf Steiner references were removed from To the Actor when they're there on the technique of acting. And I have not had the privilege of being able to read the Russian translations or the Russian materials that he wrote in 46 and sent to Russia, that but I hear that they do contain more fully the spiritual references. And I have documents, I've read documents and seen images of his work from Latvia and Lithuania in the early 30s, very, very powerfully spiritual. And so, and in my interviews with many people who study directly with Michael Chekhov, people who include Jack Colvin and Joanna Merlin, both of them did not want to bring the spiritual element into the work when I was working with them, in my experience with them and conversation with them. But in interviews I have of them about Michael Chekhov, they both reference the powerful spiritual impact he had on them. And that's, to me, then a matter of the creative individuality. So I ran into a great deal of resistance for that process. And what I did to work with that is continue to work on a spiritual level with trying to solve healing that, and to be as transparent as possible, and to support the work of those people who do not want that part revealed, to respect their creative individuality, to request that they respect my creative individuality, and to stand my path. Because even though Mr. Chekhov himself stopped revealing what the work was, and those who work directly with him may carry that sense of it's not to be discussed because he did not discuss it, I do feel personally that it is my mission to be fully authentic with how I view the work. And because the spiritual activity in the work is the thing that draws me to it and brings me to the love of it and the desire to share it, I must and can only do it that way. And I realize that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. We don't have to all, drink the Kool-Aid. So in addition to my own pursuit of the understanding of how the spiritual world is related to Michael Chekhov and how to bring his work forward, I also went in the very opposite direction, and I sought out very hardcore scientific information and athletic studies, medical studies, quantum physics, metaphysics, all sorts of other sciences. And I did this together with Mala Powers. And together we also sought to be able to share the work through those means, so that my aim in teaching is to be able to reach the person who has no interest whatsoever in the spiritual underpinnings of Michael Chekhov. And I am able to speak through whatever means that person would like to learn. So whether it's a kinesthetic experience, imagery, it's however it is. I've sought many different ways to approach the work so that I can offer a practical and functional way of working with Michael Chekhov, regardless of what your desire is in relation to the spiritual process. So that's another way that I work to resolve the challenges that came to me. And I'm grateful for all of the challenges which have come to me, because they have helped me grow as a human being and as a teacher.
Use 1, 2, or 3 words. Acting is.
Acting is transforming self for others.
Transforming
Yes.
self or others?
For others.
For others. Oh, I thought or others.
The little word, for.
Yeah.
It's 4 words, but that 4.
We'll let it pass. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about your program of the NMCA, or that's the main thing that you're doing. The program of teaching. What's the platform options of classes?
So the work between the 3 founders of the NMCA, Will Kilroy, Mala Powers, and I began really in '88. And in 1993, we presented what we believe historically was the first Michael Chekhov workshop at a major acting conference. And it was a full-day workshop in Philadelphia at the Association for Theater and Higher Education. And that shifted everything. And we got so much powerful response from that Will Kilroy went back to his University of Southern Maine, and arranged for us to begin an intensive program. So we are in our 27th year of offering the Chekhov Training Intensive. We began the first teacher certification track globally. And recently we've added a directing certification, an acting certification, and a design certification. Our week-long intensive that we generally offer twice a year is a 7-day course, and it's truly intensive. It is basically most days 12 hours a day, maybe a little longer. Usually start at 8:45 in the morning, go to 9:30 at night. And it works with this rhythm of exploration of a technique and theory, and improvisation and rehearsal. And then we go deeper into application processes such as auditioning, the script analysis, which is synth analysis, and directing. And we have an evening of improvisation and monologues and artistic sharing. And we have a work in progress presentation at the end of the 6th day. And for the work in progress presentation, everyone presents their scenes, and they do their scenes either once or twice during the dress rehearsal. Everyone performs their scene 2 ways, 2 contrasting ways, using completely different aspects of the chart. And then for the presentation, they decide which they will do. And if they did it really great in rehearsal, they're asked to do something completely new for the work in progress sharing, because it's about the work and it's not about impressing an audience. During the week, in the process, the pedagogical structure goes around this entire chart for inspired acting, which originated in Michael Chekhov hand drew for Mala Powers and was first presented to the general public when Mala released the on the technique of acting in 1991. So the original version, Chekhov drew for Mala to outline her chart, his technique for her in a clear way. And he loved to draw, he was an artist. And so he used charts and graphs a lot, and I do too. So Mala and I and Will, as we continued working together, began to expand on that chart and reorganize it. And so now this chart is the flow of how we teach, and we go through the chart using, and we teach, and the whole program is developed using the principles of the technique. So the law of triplicity is represented in multiple ways, like we go through the whole chart 3 times, we go through it very quickly, then we go through it very much in depth, and then we do a very quick review with applications. And it's a rapid immersion style of work. We don't spend a whole lot of time mulling around doing amorphous kinds of exercises with no understanding of how to apply them. We learn them, we discover them, we understand the theory behind them and how each one relates to the feeling of the whole. And we have practical experiences with improvisations and games, and then we rehearse right off the bat with them. So you wind up doing your scene like 50 different times, 50 different ways, and it all comes together in some special way. And the 7th day of class is an opportunity for our certification candidates to share their work. The certification candidates, our teacher certification is an absolute earned certification. It is not a certificate of completion. You can, show up and pay your money and not walk away with a certificate. The only way you're getting the certificate is if you complete all the work, and the work that you've done has satisfactorily established within my mind and heart and will, and Will Kilroy's mind and heart and will, that you represent this technique in the ways that I've discussed already, that you understand the NMCA pedagogy and can teach it. With that said, we encourage you to alter it and adapt it to your particular needs, and we'll coach you how to do that. But a capstone project is required, either directing a play or teaching a class or performing, depends on what your candidacy is in. Attending 2 of the intensives is required. For actors and directors, you also need to attend the advanced Deeper by Demand course, where we devise pieces using Michael Chekhov's technique. And we learn the Rudolf Steiner peripherals of speech and eurythmy and some other additional activities. And we work with stage combat, Chekhov in combat. And so the capstones are pretty much the equivalent of a master's thesis. And with that, I can honestly say that that we certify on an average 1 to 2 people a year. And so it's a very, very rigorous process. When you're done, our aim is that you feel absolute confidence that you absolutely know and could share this work. If you're a director, you need to be able to teach it in an instant to an actor who knows nothing about Chekhov in order to help solve problems, right? If you're a designer, you need to be able to express all the concepts in the way the designs are. And if you're a director, you need to be able to guide that designer. And if you're a teacher, you need to be able to teach directors and designers and actors all those things. So everyone learns the same basic material, and then it gets specialized depending on which direction, which area you're getting certified in.
Until you answered this question, I didn't know how much I learned. No, but it's really remarkable because I really feel that this program is it 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 challenges you to know the whole every aspect in this work. You need to know his biography, and then it clicks. Why did he came up with this stuff? You need to know how to approach directing. You need to know how to approach, like you said, a dialogue with designers, a dialogue with. It really is a remarkable program. I'm so proud that I did it, and it really is something that it's really one of the greatest adventures that I did in my life. It really is.
I'm so glad that you were able to do it with us, and yeah, you are a wonderful model for people who want to learn the process. And it's important for me to say that I believe that Chekhov is a good thing no matter who you can study it from. After you come to the NMCA, you are so grounded in a clear, why did Chekhov come up with this and how does this all work together, that you can study anywhere with anyone and gain so much more from that.
With a firm base.
With having the firm base. If you think of some of the workshops that you went to and in different places following NMCA, if you could imagine how different it would be if you hadn't had NMCA.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Tell me about a student of yours that you remember very well that touched you for some reason.
It's perhaps the hardest question because so many pour into my heart. I'm going to go back to one of our first students in the NMCA program, which was one of Will's students at the University of Southern Maine, Josh Chenard. And Josh was just this really funny, sweet young man. And when he did our knock 3 times, he just was just the funniest. And he kind of, Mala gave him the title of, the funniest. Not that we rank that, and we all just appreciate what everyone comes up with for this improvisation. But for years, Will and Mel and I would laugh about Josh's knock 3 times. And
just for the record, knock 3 times it's an improvisation that you created with a lot of Chekhov tools and other things that you need to that you have to do it in the improvisation.
Yes, you're given a list of things you must do, and everyone has to hit those points. And it's great because you see the creative individuality. Nobody's is the same, and it's just great. Well, Josh became one of our first certified teachers, and Josh continued to work with and bring the work around. He went to, I believe it was VCU, Virginia Commonwealth in Richmond, and did his master's work and turned on a whole bunch of people at VCU to that, to the Chekhov technique, and then went on to the University of New Mexico. And because he was at the University of New Mexico, Will wound up at New Mexico State, where he is now. Josh went on and went back to VCU and then went elsewhere. But Josh, what Josh did in bringing the work out, the seeds he planted at VCU led me in 2013. I went to the Southeastern Theater Conference, and this is a conference with 4,000 actors, 4,000 actors. And there's many, many divisions and things like that. And it was the first theater conference I'd been to probably since I was 16 and went to the International Thespian Society conference, where I was not teaching or speaking or presenting or anything. I was just under the wire attending. And there were 11 different Chekhov workshops. And I was like, oh my God, my dream has been to bring this out. I have worked so hard to try and get the world to know that there's somebody called Michael, not Anton, and how powerful it is. And here I am seeing Chekhov and 11 different teachers offering it from all over. And I went to one of the workshops, and there were 2 young graduate students who were teaching the workshop. And I was standing between a teacher similar age to me and a 19-year-old actor, and neither of them had been to a Chekhov workshop. In fact, the actor thought he was in an Anton Chekhov workshop. And I was watching these 2 young grad students lead us and watching their eyes pop open. And I was, of course, the 3 of us were working together in harmonious groupings and giving them, and I was sort of expanding on the explanations a little bit here and there, and I was like, these 2 students were Josh's students. And Josh's students were opening the eyes of this teacher and this young actor, introducing them. And I felt the lineage flow through me. I felt from Michael Chekhov to all of the direct students that I've been taught by and interviewed and learned from, and all the others who have taught me and shared their work with me, passing through me and Will and Mala to Josh, and Josh passing it into his students, and they're passing it on. And this beautiful, powerful cycle. In that moment, thanks to Josh, that I experienced this psychological gesture. I realized I had this gesture, I guess like Sisyphus, of trying to push this Chekhov ball up this hill. And every time I took a breath, it rolled back down. It pushed, pushed, pushed. And I realized that the Chekhov ball had gone over the hill and it was rolling on its own. And that experience, came back, right, and shifted some deep, multi-decade urge that I had, that I thought was not succeeding. It allowed me to see just how much our efforts have flowed out into across the globe. So thanks, Josh.
I wonder if you talked about Sisyphus, and I wonder if, well, Chekhov probably felt it all of his life, that he's pushing and it's not happening. I wonder if he was happy as Sisyphus. Sometimes I feel like we owe him. Sometimes I feel like we have to do it, or he gave his life for this work, and I wonder if he was happy.
It's such a great question of whether he was happy, and there's some people who think he wasn't. But he called Mala Little Pixie and she called him Big Pixie. And the jokes that that the sense of humor that he had, like Jack Colvin, my favorite Jack Colvin story that of Chekhov that he shared was on, after he had the heart attack, and where Chekhov lived in Beverly Hills was a small house and there were no sidewalks on the streets and it was very hilly. So Jack would have to take him down to Sunset Boulevard where there's a triangle. I believe it's a triangle in between a couple of roads, and walk around this triangle to get him exercise. And he refused to use a cane. He did not want to use a cane. And so he'd take an umbrella. And so they're walking, him with his umbrella. And Jack says, Mr. Chekhov, why won't you use your cane? Why do you have to use an umbrella? And Mr. Chekhov says, Jack, when you walk with a cane, everyone thinks, oh, that poor old man. But when you walk with an umbrella, everybody looks up and wants to know what you know that they don't. That sense of humor, I think, is sharing something with us, and that there was a fondness and a sense of fun and a sense of passion. And although he was very shy, and he suffered from paranoia. Herb Hatfield told me that when he went to the Oscars in 1946, when he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, that he was so scared of the police, he kept telling the limo driver to slow down, and they were already going under the speed limit. And he was, George Stanoff told about how he was very shy. They needed to generate some money for the school, and George talks about how difficult it was for Michael Chekhov to approach some wealthy benefactors and ask them. He was so shy. So things like that, the practical management parts, I think, were a struggle for him. But the artistic parts, I think, were extremely rewarding, despite his frustrations and limitations. I think it was sad for him to not be able to continue to speak his truth and a struggle to keep moving forward to be able to bring the work out. But overall, I think he was at peace and had a lot of support and joy around him.
But one of the proofs we have is that he didn't left it. He didn't give up. I mean, he went through so much and he didn't give up. So maybe he was happy.
It's true. I mean, his destiny is so extraordinary. Like in my film, From Russia to Hollywood, you just see how the political environment, the social circumstances just continually crush all his impulses. And every time he looks like he's right at the top with the ball ready to roll over, it just comes crashing back down. And yet he kept striving, and he fell in love with the problems. And in that regard, his biography, his life, becomes, as you said, a model for us. I mean, who has had a worse life? Who has had more struggle, personal struggle, and health struggles, and socio-political struggles, and everything. So all the trials and tribulations and every aspect of human living, he experienced in great challenge and rose above it. His work rises above it, and he kept going.
And you talked about From Russia to Hollywood, and can you tell us a few words about it?
Yes, From Russia to Hollywood was the first professional documentary made about Michael Chekhov. And it's called From Russia to Hollywood, the 100-year odyssey of Michael Chekhov and George Stanoff. And I had begun videotaping. I knew my teachers, the ones from Darlington, were starting to pass, and I started recording interviews with them, Beatrice Straight and Ford Rainey. And I asked Mala to be my my host. And I started when we came like in '93 to New York and to Philadelphia. We interviewed Eddie Grove, and we interviewed Joanna Merlin, who had been my teacher in the '80s, and Deirdre and Eleanor Faison, and captured all this information on them. And then I took my camera with me to Russia, took it to the first international workshop, which I have a little poster of. This is the one that Jorg Andres and Jobst Langhans created in Berlin in 1992. And there's the performances on this side. And from there, I took the camera with me to Russia in '93, and again videotaped much of the second international workshop, '94 international workshop in Forest Row, England, that Sarah Kane was the artistic director of, and then in '95 to Berlin again. And in '98, I created the first international workshop in Connecticut in the United States, '98 and '99, and then I turned it over to the international workshop to Joanna and Jessica Cerullo. So but for those, I carried my camera around and I videotaped. But I also ran out of funds. I'd been supporting myself and paying for all this footage, collecting this footage with my income from acting, and I was traveling too much, so I was losing my acting career. So I needed to just focus on Los Angeles. I was running the Chekhov studio there, and still again, my only real income was acting. So I met one of George Stanoff's students who wanted to make a documentary about him. And when I told him that George was teaching pretty much pure Chekhov, he realized that his documentary wasn't going to move anywhere. But he was just starting it, and I was 8-9 years into mine, and he had funds. And so I offered, and we merged our two projects. And so I helped create the narration. We had Gregory Peck narrate it with Mala also. And we shot new footage. We went to speak with Leslie Caron in France, and John Barry, who had directed Michael Chekhov in Cross My Heart, and who was also one of the students in Lessons for the Professional Actor course. And we went to Dartington Hall and interviewed William Elmhurst. And so we collected quite a bit of material, and it aired on PBS, and it was a finalist in the Hollywood Film Festival and documentaries, and it screened at international film festivals in London and in various places around the world. And illegally, it's on YouTube. So I subsequently contributed to 2 other documentaries, Michael Chekhov, The Dartington Years, that Martin Sharp created following our 1994 adventure, and also to the first Michael Chekhov Russian documentary made by Planeta 4. So about a third of both of those projects are my footage.
Okay.
And I have a massive archive of the footage, hundreds of hours.
Oh, wow. Yes. I have a dream, you know it. Okay. We're just arrived to our last question, which is the technique helping you in your everyday life? And if so, can you give examples for it?
For me, the feeling of ease, I often say, is something I need on an absolute daily basis. And just remembering that it exists and remembering how it relates to a feeling of beauty and entirety and form, the four brothers of art, helps me make it through the struggles that I've experienced. And my life has certainly been an extreme roller coaster of physical and emotional pain. And I suffered a severe injury to my back as a stunt woman, and was severely impaired for 25 years. The only time I could really sort of walk and not be intensely in pain was when I was teaching. And a couple of years ago, sustained a head injury, and I have a brain like, they say, like a Muhammad Ali, an athlete with multiple concussions. And so the entire sort of Damocles is hanging over me in terms of impending loss of mental capabilities due to multiple injuries, and the loss of dear people to me, my husband, my sister, my brother. Those traumas, those sorrows they just disappear when I'm with Mr. Chekhov's work, whether I'm doing expanding and contracting just because I can in the middle of the day, in the middle of my living room, or outside in the beautiful, world, or sharing it, or thinking about what to share, or devising new potentialities out of it. It gives me purpose. It gives me passion. I'm absolutely clear that this was my destiny, and my destiny was interwoven with restoring the spiritual content to Michael Chekhov's work and bringing the spirit of Michael Chekhov into the 21st century. And it gives me purpose.
Okay, Lisa, Dalton, I just want to say a huge thank you for for your generosity, and thank you for your time.
Thank you here. It really was interesting for me to contemplate your questions. So thank you, and David, for helping mentor you with that. And I'm proud to have been, among a handful of people who have inspired you, and excited to see what your work brings into the world. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much.